All right, so quiz 13 review, okay? So let's go ahead and start off with some of the questions you're going to have to know how to do. So, number one, okay, something you guys need to know how to do is going to be something like 8i squared, okay? So 8i squared should be something that you are able to do. Now remember, whenever it says 8i squared, they're basically just asking you to square every number inside. Okay? So 8 squared, that's 64. I squared is I squared, right? But what is I squared equal to? -1, right? So I'm going to put a little note here for you guys. I squared is -1. Okay, I'm just going to put that right there so you can say, why did that change to a -1? That's by definition, right? That becomes a -1. So your answer should be a -64, and you're done, right? So that's going to be a type of problem that you're going to see tomorrow. Okay, something similar to that. Here's another problem that you're going to see tomorrow, or something similar to it. So -5 plus 2i, 4 plus 7i. Notice they're going to be multiplied together. Okay? So whenever you see a binomial times a binomial, you're going to have to FOIL. Some people like calling it FOIL. First, outer, inner, last. Or distribute. That's what I prefer to call it. Which means you're going to get your -5 and multiply it. And then you're going to get your positive 2i and multiply it. And then obviously you're going to want to simplify once you're done. So let's go ahead and do that. So -5 times a positive 4 is a -20. I'm doing the green part right now, okay? And then the -5 times a positive 7i, that's 35i. Okay? Now, we're done with the green part. Let's go with the purple part, right? The 2i times a 4, that's a positive 8i. And 2i times 7i, that's positive 14i squared. Now remember, if you see an I squared, you can change it to a -1, right? So we're going to do that in the next step. But first I'm going to combine these because these are like terms. 35i plus 8i is what? 43, all right, I. And then plus 14 times -1, right? I squared is -1. Okay? So, go ahead and tell me what's going on. Because I'm hearing you and I'm glad that you're noticing. What is it? Or
the 35 is supposed to be negative.
Good. All right. Yeah, the 35 is supposed to be negative. No one's told me anything. And I'm like, man, I wonder how long it's going to take them to notice. I'm supposed to multiply -5 times a positive 7i, right? That should be a -35i. I put plus, and no one stopped me. And then I was listening, and I heard you guys talking about it. And I'm like, good, someone's seen it. Hopefully they're going to point it out, right? So, yes. So, this should be a negative, right? Negative. So good. So -35i plus 8i. How much is that? All right, -27i. So thank you. Okay. So hold on, let me write this down, Joseph. Because every time someone notices something, I want to make sure I give them extra credit. It was Joseph that said it, right? All right. All right. So, all right, 14 times -1 is -14. So -20 minus 27i minus 14. I'm just distributing that -1. Combine your normal numbers, -20 and -14. So that's going to be a -34 minus 27i. And you're done. Remember, whenever you're working with these imaginary numbers, You want to try to simplify them as much as possible, but you can never really get rid of everything unless maybe some of the numbers cancel out or maybe the I values will cancel out. But in most cases, you're going to have a number and then an imaginary unit as well. Okay, so these are called complex numbers. So there you go. So you're going to have stuff like this. Okay. Aside from these, they're going to want you to graph some stuff. Okay, so here's question number 3. We're going to put graph. We'll try, let me do 2 of them. We'll try -3 plus 2i. And then we'll do part B. We'll do 4 minus 3i. I'm going to put them on the same graph, okay? That way we don't have to graph 2 different ones. Actually, let me make that line just a little bit thicker here. So I'm just making a graph that'll be able to accommodate everything here. So 5 by 5. Okay, so a 5 by 5 graph. Now, I'll use red for my first dot. Now remember, to graph these things, you basically have to convert that complex number into a point. Okay, whoops. So that point right here is what? Can someone tell me what point I should write? All right, -3, +2. Good, because we're just taking these numbers, right? The -3 is there, and the +2 is there. And then just graph it the way you normally would. So -3, +2, that's right here. There's that dot. There's my answer for part A. Okay, just going to put a dot on my graph. All right, for part B, let's use a blue dot. What's the point for part B? All right, 4, -3. So let's go to 4, -3. 1, 2, 3. That's right here. And there's that answer. So, I mean, they're going to give you 2 questions like this. I can see it right here. There's 2 questions where they're going to ask you that. That should be relatively straightforward. Hopefully, it's nothing that's going to confuse you guys. Notice based on this thing that I printed out, there's a total of 5 questions based on the things we've done so far. So hopefully so far you feel confident, not too bad. Okay? Now going to the next page, there's 2 questions based on the following. They're going to give you a point on a graph and they're going to want you to give them the complex number. Okay, so number 4. Write the complex number that is graphed. I guess that is shown, I guess, either way. Make kind of a smaller one, doesn't have to be too big here. So a 3 by 3. And there's my point right there. Okay, let me kind of make this go up a little higher here. So there's the point. So before I write it as a complex number, let's write the point itself. What point is that? 3, 1. Okay. So if the point is 3, 1, remember the 3 is my A, the 1 is my B. Remember, they want us to write it in a complex number, meaning A plus or minus BI, right? So what I'm going to write is the following. 3 plus 1i. Or you could write 3 plus I. Either one is okay. Okay, so either one is okay. You just got to figure out which one you prefer, or look to see what's given to you guys on the multiple choice options. So they're going to give you two problems like that. Hopefully that would be pretty easy. Now, after that, we start getting into the heavy stuff, okay? So they're going to give you a couple questions where you're going to have to use a quadratic formula. A couple questions where you may have to complete the square. Some where you're going to have to find a decimal answer using your calculator. Okay, so let's do one of each. That way you can see them. Oops, not number 1. I'm sorry. I got to remember how to count here. Number 5. So n squared minus n minus 2 equals 0. Now, that's the problem. I'm going to say use the quadratic formula. To solve. So normally you're supposed to factor, and then based on your factor you can find your solutions. But you know, we learned a formula that allows us to not factor, right? Let me remind you of what the quadratic formula is. So n, it's supposed to be x equals, but since my variables are n, I'm going to use n. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Remember, all you need to know is your ABCs, right? Your ABCs are found right here. A is 1, B is negative 1, C is negative 2. Those are your ABCs. So just plug them in and work it out, right? So let's do that. N is equal to negative of my B value, which is a negative 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's negative 1 squared, minus 4 times a. A is a 1, and c is a negative 2. Divide all that by 2 times a, which is a 1. So I'm just plugging in my a, b, and c into that equation, okay? I'm not trying to do anything, too difficult. I'm just plug it in. Now you start simplifying. Remember, I told you guys doing these problems is easy, but doing the work can be kind of a drag, right? Sometimes it's just you're trying to simplify lots of things at once. So let's see. Negative of a negative 1, that's a 1. Plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared is a 1. Negative 4 times 1. So I'm over here. Negative 4 times 1. That's a negative 4, right? And then a negative 4 times a negative 2, that becomes a positive 8. Okay, so there's a positive 8 on the back side, and then right here it's going to be all divided by 2. So 1 plus or minus the square root of 9 over 2. Now remember, you're supposed to leave your answer in a square root unless you can simplify it, right? Can I simplify the square root of 9? What is it? A 3. So let's write n equals 1 plus or minus 3 over 2. And remember, you could leave your answer like this, but when all you have is numbers, they would prefer you give them the actual solution. Okay, so what is the actual solution? Well, n equals 1 plus 3 over 2, or n equals 1 minus 3 over 2. Remember how they always want you to write the answers in two parts, right? Bless you. So 1 plus 3 is 4, and 4 divided by 2, that's 2, right? And then for the next one, 1 minus 3 is negative 2, and if you divide that by 2, you get negative 1. So your answers are negative 1 and 2. Now guys, I haven't decided yet, but I made this quiz. There's two of these problems. Okay? I don't know if I'm going to have you guys do two of them. I don't know if I'll just make it one. Because I know these take some time. Okay, so I'm not really sure yet. I haven't decided. Maybe what I'll do is I'll take one away from another one, and that way you have more time to do these, because these aren't that bad. You just got to make sure you plug in the numbers in the right place. And you should be able to get these things right. So I still haven't decided exactly how many of these you're going to get. I don't know yet. As of now, you guys have 16 questions, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to cut those down a little bit. Okay, maybe to 14. Get rid of some of the ones that take a little longer. Okay, so but there's going to be definitely one of these types of questions, okay, where you're going to have to use that formula. So make sure you write that formula down somewhere so that you can use it for your notes. Okay, now the next type of problem that they're going to ask you is to find the answer using a calculator. Okay, so let me show you one more of these. So this will be number 6. So find a solution using a calculator. All right, so and then they're going to give us something like this. Oh, which, by the way, I kind of forgot to mention. I know I mentioned it when I taught this to you guys, but I wanted to remind you guys, whenever you do problems like these, or even like the one up here that I wrote the equation, right? N squared minus n minus 2 equals 0. If it's not equal to 0, make sure you set it equal to 0, okay? You can only use these formulas if they're set equal to 0. So make sure that you have them set equal to 0, okay? Because sometimes there might be a question I give you that's not going to be set equal to 0. You're going to have to do that first, and then you can do the work in order to solve using the quadratic formula. So, all right, if I do this problem, all right, here's my ABCs. So A is 1, B is -3, C is -6. So R is equal to, I'll just write the formula again. Negative B plus or minus. You guys don't have to do that. I'm just going to write it there so that we can see what we're plugging in. Okay, so that's our formula. Let's plug in our ABCs. So R is equal to negative of a -3 plus or minus the square root of B squared, that's -3 squared, minus 4 times A, which is 1, and C, which is -6, divided by 2 times A, which is 1. So there's all the numbers plugged in. Okay, everything's been plugged in. Now we have to simplify it, right? So R equals a +3 plus or minus the square root of -3 squared is 9. And then -4 times 1 is a -4 times a -6 is a +24. That's over 2. So let's continue. That's 3 plus or minus the square root of 33 over 2. Now remember, there's two answers, right? Adding and subtracting, right? So let me write this down. R equals 3 plus radical 33 over 2. R equals 3 minus radical 33 over 2. And they want us to find the answer in decimal form. Use a calculator. So let me do that for us. Okay? Give me a second so I can screen share this. Where's my keypad? Give me a second. All right. So I have to plug in both of these into my calculator. So here we go. 3 plus radical 3. So for me, radical 33, I'm sorry. I'm going to hit enter. And then I'm going to divide by 2. So R is equal to 4.372. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other one. So I'm going to type in 3 minus the square root of 33. I'm going to hit enter. Then I'm going to divide it by 2. So my answer is negative 1.372. I know there's been some of you guys that I've asked to see if I can test to see if I can put that calculator into your devices, right? For some of you guys I've been able to do it, but for some of you guys I haven't. That's the little app that I try to get you guys to get on your phones. It'd be really nice if you guys can get that because it's a graphing calculator that works really well. It's a TI. I mean, you guys can see, right? Texas Instruments, right? So it's an actual legit calculator. It doesn't always work with Apple devices, unfortunately. With Androids, it does. Anybody who has an Android that would like this, and if I haven't given it to you yet, let me know. I can always give it to you. It's free. I don't charge you anything. It's free on the Android, what's it called? The Google Play Store. This is called, it's a weird name. It's down in the bottom left corner of the board. It's called Wabbit Emu. Just download that and you can get that. Just let me know because you need the ROM, like the brain of it. So I can give you the brain of it. That way it can work. That's for Androids. For Apples, I'm still trying to figure out how to get it to work because Apple, they really lock down their phones. So they don't really let you do too much with their devices other than what they give you permission to do. So that's what's hard about it. So anyway, are we okay with that one right there? I mean, we still did a quadratic formula. Normally, you would have just stopped right here and you would have been done. But since they wanted you to give them a decimal, you had to plug it into a calculator, okay? There's only going to be one question like that. Maybe. I'm not sure, okay? But I'm guessing I'm going to keep it because if I have you do that, that means you practice the quadratic formula twice. So that's good. More than enough. That's why I'm saying I might take away one of the other ones. All right. Last page here. And this is the next thing I'm going to do with you guys is probably like the worst of all of them. Okay? I don't know if you guys will agree with me. But do you guys remember completing the square? That's what I would say out of this whole lesson, the 3 lessons we've done, or 4, this is the one that's like the hardest one. Okay? So solve by completing the square. Okay? So solve by completing the square. And I'm going to give us one that's not already kind of like set up perfectly for us. That way you can see what you're supposed to do if it's not set up perfectly for us. It's not a lot of work. It's just a little extra step. Remember, whenever they tell you to solve and you're doing these quadratics, you should always be equal to 0. If you look at this problem, it's not equal to 0. So let's make it equal to 0. Okay? So I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides. So I get r squared minus 8r minus, what is that, 11 equals 0. Okay? So if they want us to complete the square, I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a lot of steps, okay? But the first step was to get the number, in our case, the negative 11, and chuck it over to the other side. Okay, we don't want to see it so that we can make room for the brand new C. Remember I told you we got to find a brand new C. So this is what it's going to look like. If we move the 11 over, r squared minus 8r plus something equals 11 plus something. So we move that solo number over to the other side. We create these blank spaces, right? These are our brand new C values. Does anybody remember how you find your brand new C value? In other words, the underlying portion. What's the formula? There's a little formula. Now, it might be in your notes, but I'm curious if anybody can remember it off the top of your head. It starts with the letter B. There's a division. No? So I'm going to put right here, recall B over 2 squared. Okay? You're going to find your B value, which for us, what's my B value here? Look at my problem right here. What's my B value? -8, right? So -8 divided by 2 squared. That's -4 squared. Well, what's -4 squared? 16, right? So we got 16. I'm going to put that here and there. Okay? On the right side, I'm just going to add 27. On the left side, well, I have to factor it. Okay, now I don't know if you guys remember how we did it, but I told you guys the way you find the pieces is which letter are you using? So R, right? So I'm going to put R there. What is the first math symbol that you see, whether it be addition or subtraction? Well, it happens to be subtraction, so we're going to put minus. And then to find that little number inside, you take the square root of your C value. So what's the square root of 16? 4. Okay, so I'm going to kind of put a little remark right there. That's the square root of C, okay? That way you know, like, oh, that's where he got that from. Okay? If I want to solve for R, what do I do to both sides? What should I do to both sides? Notice there's a square on top. Well, not square, but square root both sides, right? So we're going to have R minus 4 equals, don't forget the plus or minus, okay? I'm going to put another little note here. Okay, I'm going to put just that, like, don't forget it. You should always have a plus or minus every time you take a square root of a number. So in order to get R by itself, what do? Add 4, right? So let's just add 4, and then we're done. But this one's a little on the tricky side here, because if you write this answer, you'll notice it's not going to be on the test. Okay? It's not that you're wrong, but can I simplify the square root of 27? Well, is there a square root to 27? Think about it. Is there something square root of 27? Like, is it 4 or 5 or 6? It's 3 radical 3. Good, right? You're supposed to simplify. How did we get that? Well, here we go. Here's a little bit of side work here. Radical 27 is, think of two numbers, one of which has a nice square root. Well, 9 times 3. 9 has a square root, right? The square root of 9 is 3. So remember, this little piece just stays right there. Okay, nothing happens to it. So it's 3 radical 3. So R is 4 plus or minus 3 radical 3. And that's probably the answers you're going to see. 4 plus 3 radical 3. 4 minus 3 radical 3. Okay, so this is what you're going to have to do. All right, this is what your quiz is made up of. Stuff like this. Completing the square, using the quadratic formula, figuring out how to simplify I terms, right? I squared, graphing complex numbers, identifying complex numbers, all that stuff. All right. Let me stop this.